I was 63 years old when my daughter Sarah called me manipulative for the last time. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening while I was organizing my craft supplies in the spare bedroom of my Phoenix townhouse. Sarah's voice had that cold, measured tone she'd perfected since marrying Brandon 3 years ago. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mom, I need to talk to you about the baby shower. Sarah's words cut through my concentration as I sorted through ribbons and fabric scraps. I'd been planning her shower for weeks, secretly coordinating with her best friend Monica to make sure every detail was perfect. After 5 years of fertility struggles, Sarah was finally pregnant, and I wanted to celebrate this miracle properly. What about it, sweetheart? Monica and I have been working so hard to make it special for you. I set down a spool of ivory lace, the same pattern I'd used for Sarah's wedding favors. We've got the venue booked at the community center, the caterer confirmed, and I even found those vintage teacups you loved at the antique store. Sarah's silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice was sharper than I'd ever heard it. Mom, that's exactly the problem. You've taken over everything without asking me what I actually want. Brandon and I have been talking, and we think it's better if you don't come to the shower. The ribbon slipped from my fingers, unrolling across the hardwood floor in a cascade of cream silk. I'm sorry, what did you just say? You heard me. We've decided to uninvite you from the baby shower. Every time there's an event in our lives, you turn it into some production about you. The engagement party, where you hired that photographer without asking us. Our wedding, where you insisted on giving that speech even after we asked you not to. Now this shower that was supposed to be a simple gathering with friends has become this elaborate event that nobody asked for. I sank into my desk chair, staring at the craft supplies scattered around me. Each item represented hours of planning, of imagining Sarah's face when she saw how beautiful everything would be. The hand-painted mason jars for centerpieces. The custom photo album I'd been secretly filling with pictures of Sarah from birth to now, ready to add the first ultrasound photos. The tiny booties I'd knitted in soft yellow yarn, gender-neutral because they were waiting to find out. Sarah, honey, I was just trying to help. This is my first grandchild. I thought you'd want something special. See? That's exactly what I'm talking about. This isn't about you, Mom. This is about me and Brandon and our baby. But somehow you've made yourself the center of attention again. Monica told me you even booked a string quartet without asking anyone. A string quartet, Mom? For a baby shower. My cheeks burned with embarrassment. The quartet had seemed like such a lovely touch when I'd called to book them last week. I'd imagined the soft classical music playing while Sarah opened her gifts, creating the kind of elegant atmosphere I'd seen in magazine spreads. I just wanted it to be memorable. It's always about what you want it to be, never about what we actually need. Sarah's voice cracked slightly, and I could hear Brandon murmuring something in the background. Look, we've already called Monica and explained the situation. She understands. The shower is still happening, just without all the extra drama you've added. And without you. The line went dead. I sat there holding my phone, staring at Sarah's contact photo, a picture from her college graduation where she was laughing at something I'd said. That felt like a different lifetime now, a different daughter. I called Monica immediately. We'd been friends for 15 years, ever since our daughters started high school together. If anyone would help me understand what had just happened, it would be her. Oh, Helen. Monica's voice was gentle but tired. I was hoping Sarah would change her mind before making that call. Monica, what is she talking about? I was just trying to make her shower beautiful. You know how long she's waited for this baby. I know, and your heart is in the right place. But Helen, you did kind of steamroll over all of our original plans. We were going to have it at my house, just cake and punch, and maybe 15 people. Simple and sweet. Then you booked the community center for 100 guests, hired caterers, ordered professional decorations. Sarah felt like she'd lost control of her own celebration. I walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the desert sunset painting the mountains pink and gold. But it's going to be beautiful, Monica. I spent $3,000 just on the flowers alone. White roses and baby's breath arranged in vintage silver vases I found at estate sales. And the cake from Sweet Dreams Bakery, the 4-tier one with hand-piped fondant flowers. Sarah loves their red velvet. $3,000 on flowers? Monica's voice pitched higher. Helen, that's more than most people spend on their entire wedding reception. Sarah and Brandon are trying to save money for the baby. They're stressed about daycare costs and pediatrician bills, and you're spending their annual grocery budget on one afternoon. That stung because it was true. My late husband Robert had left me comfortable when he passed 5 years ago. His life insurance and the sale of our family home in Colorado had given me financial security I'd never had before. Sarah and Brandon, on the other hand, were both teachers struggling with student loans and a mortgage on their starter home in Tempe. I can afford it, I said quietly. And I want to do this for Sarah. She's my only child, Monica. This is my only chance to be a grandmother, to celebrate this incredible moment. But it's not your moment to celebrate, Helen, it's hers. And she's telling you that all of this elaborate planning is making her anxious instead of happy. After hanging up with Monica, I spent the evening walking through my townhouse, looking at all the shower preparations that had taken over my life for the past month. The guest bathroom, stocked with silk hand towels, embossed with tiny rattles. The dining room, where I'd been assembling party favors, little white boxes filled with Jordan almonds and tied with personalized ribbons. The garage where I'd stored rented round tables and chair covers in pale pink and mint green. I'd retired from my job as a high school counselor 2 years ago, and these kinds of projects had become my way of staying busy, of feeling useful. When Sarah announced her pregnancy, I'd thrown myself into planning mode because it gave me purpose, it made me feel needed. But apparently, it made Sarah feel suffocated. I barely slept that night. By morning, I'd made a decision that surprised even me. If Sarah wanted drama, I was going to give her drama worth remembering. I started with the vendors. The community center was easy, they had a cancellation policy, and I got back the full deposit of $800. The caterer was more complicated. I'd ordered enough food for 100 people, finger sandwiches and fruit platters and that beautiful salmon spread Sarah loved. But when I explained the situation, the owner of Elegant Occasions took pity on me. She'd been in business for 20 years and had seen family drama derail plenty of events. "Tell you what, Mrs. Morrison," she said over the phone, "I can't give you a full refund since the food is already prepped, but what if we donate everything to the women's shelter downtown? You get a tax deduction, and we get to do something good with all this beautiful food." That gave me an idea, a wonderful, terrible idea. "Actually," I said, "what if we do something even better?" By Thursday morning, I'd transformed Sarah's canceled baby shower into something unprecedented. Instead of returning everything, I'd pivoted the entire event into a fundraiser for the Maricopa County Women and Children's Crisis Center. The same venue, the same decorations, the same string quartet, but instead of celebrating my unborn grandchild,
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
we'd be raising money for mothers and babies who really needed help. I called the crisis center director, a woman named Patricia Ruiz, who I'd met through volunteer work a few years back. When I explained what I wanted to do, she was incredulous. "Helen, you want to donate an entire baby shower's worth of supplies and decorations to us? As a fundraiser?" "Not just donate, I want to host it. Same day, same time as Sarah's original shower was supposed to be. I'll sell tickets, $50 each. All proceeds go to your family services program. We'll auction off the decorations, the centerpieces, even those string instruments, if the quartet is willing." That's incredibly generous, but can I ask why? I explained about Sarah, about being uninvited for my own grandchild's celebration, about feeling like my eagerness to help had been turned into something ugly and selfish. Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Helen, you know that your daughter probably had valid reasons for feeling overwhelmed, right? Sometimes when we love people, we show it in ways that feel suffocating to them. I know that now. But Patricia, I've already spent this money. I've already put my heart into making something beautiful. Instead of letting it all go to waste, What if we use it to help families who don't have anyone planning elaborate celebrations for them? What if we turn my drama into something meaningful? Patricia agreed, and by Friday, we had a plan. The Phoenix Women's League, where I'd been a member for 10 years, agreed to sponsor the event. Local businesses donated gift baskets for auction. The string quartet offered to play for free when they heard it was for charity. I designed invitations on my computer, printing them on the same cardstock I'd ordered for Sarah's original shower invitations. Instead of "Celebrating Baby Morrison," they read, "Celebrating all mothers and babies in need." I included a photo of the Crisis Center's nursery and explained that all proceeds would go toward providing essentials for mothers and children escaping domestic violence. The response was overwhelming. Within 3 days, I'd sold 80 tickets at $50 each. Women from my book club, my church, my volunteer organizations, all wanting to support the cause. Several people bought tickets even though they couldn't attend, just to contribute. Sarah found out about the fundraiser on Sunday. Monica called me, her voice strained. "Helen, Sarah is furious. She says you're using her baby shower to make some kind of point, that you're trying to make her look selfish for uninviting you." "That's not what this is about, Monica. I had all these preparations, all this money spent. Instead of wasting it or returning everything, I decided to do something positive with it." "How is that making Sarah look bad?" "Because everyone who was invited to her original shower got invited to your fundraiser. They're going to show up, expecting to celebrate Sarah's pregnancy, and instead they're going to be at a charity event about domestic violence. Don't you see how that makes her feel?" I hadn't thought about it from that angle. In my mind, I was salvaging something beautiful from a painful situation, but from Sarah's perspective, I was probably proving her point about making everything about myself. "Monica, I sent out completely different invitations. I made it clear this was a charity fundraiser, not a baby shower. Nobody's going to be confused. But you used the same venue, the same date, the same time. You basically replaced her shower with your own event. She feels like you're trying to overshadow her actual shower out of spite." That night, Brandon called me. In 3 years of marriage to my daughter, he'd never called me directly. His voice was careful, controlled, the way he talked to difficult parents during teacher conferences. "Helen, we need to have a conversation." "I'm listening, Brandon. This fundraiser thing you're doing, it needs to stop. Sarah is 32 weeks pregnant. She's hormonal, she's stressed about money, and now she feels like her own mother is trying to embarrass her publicly." She cried for 2 hours after Monica called her today. My chest tightened. Making Sarah cry had never been my intention. "Brandon, I'm not trying to embarrass anyone. I'm trying to do something good with money I'd already spent. Would it be better if I just threw away $3,000 worth of decorations? If I wasted all that food? It would be better if you'd respected Sarah's boundaries in the first place. She asked you not to plan an elaborate shower, and you did it anyway. She uninvited you, and instead of apologizing or trying to understand why she felt that way, you're throwing an even bigger event to prove some kind of point. I'm not trying to prove a point. I'm trying to help families in crisis. By using your daughter's pregnancy as the catalyst, Helen, don't you see how manipulative that looks? Sarah says no to your over-the-top shower plans, so you turn it into a charity event that makes you look generous and makes her look ungrateful." I sat down on my couch, suddenly feeling every one of my 63 years. "Is that really how you see it? That I'm trying to manipulate people?" Brandon's voice softened slightly. "Helen, I think you love Sarah deeply, and I think you're excited about becoming a grandmother. But I also think you have a pattern of bulldozing over other people's preferences when they don't match your vision of how things should be. And when people push back, you find ways to make them feel guilty about it." After Brandon hung up, I sat in my living room surrounded by boxes of party favors I'd assembled by hand. Each one represented hours of careful work, choosing the perfect ribbons, writing personalized thank you notes in calligraphy I'd practiced for weeks to get right. They were beautiful, thoughtful, expensive, and apparently they were also evidence of my inability to respect my daughter's wishes. But it was too late to cancel the fundraiser now. 80 women had bought tickets. The crisis center was counting on the money. Patricia had arranged for 3 families currently staying at the shelter to attend, so donors could see firsthand how their contributions would help. Saturday morning, the day of the event, I arrived at the community center at 7 a.m. to supervise setup. The same florists who would have decorated Sarah's shower transformed the space into something elegant and welcoming. White roses and baby's breath filled silver vases on every table. Exactly as I'd originally planned. The string quartet set up in the corner, tuning their instruments while volunteers arranged auction items on display tables. Patricia arrived with a photographer from the local newspaper who wanted to cover the fundraiser for their community interest section. When she saw the decorations, her eyes widened. "Helen, this is incredible! I've never seen anything this beautiful at a charity event. You've outdone yourself." I should have felt proud. Instead, I felt empty. This was exactly what I'd envisioned for Sarah's shower, down to the hand-calligraphed place cards and the chocolate fountains surrounded by strawberries and marshmallows. It was perfect, elegant, memorable, everything I'd wanted her celebration to be. And she wasn't here to see it. The first guests arrived at 11, and within 20 minutes the room was buzzing with conversation. Women I'd known for years complimented the decorations, bid enthusiastically on auction items, and wrote generous checks for the crisis center's programs. The families from the shelter mingled with donors, sharing their stories and expressing gratitude for the support. It was a successful event by any measure. We raised $12,000 in ticket sales and auction proceeds. The newspaper photographer captured beautiful shots of volunteers presenting the donation check to Patricia. Several women approached me afterward to ask if I'd help plan their own charity fundraisers. But as I stood in that perfectly decorated room, watching strangers enjoy the celebration I'd planned for my daughter, I finally understood what Sarah had been trying to tell me. This wasn't about her at all. It was about me, my vision, my need to create something impressive. I'd told myself I was planning the shower of Sarah's dreams, but I'd never actually asked her what she dreamed of. I'd assumed that because I found elaborate celebrations meaningful, she would too. The irony was crushing. In trying to prove that I could turn my drama into something positive, I'd actually proven Sarah's point about my need to be the center of attention. Even my act of charity had become a performance, a way to show everyone how generous and creative I was in the face of family conflict. Monica found me in the community center kitchen after most of the guests had left, stacking rented plates for the catering crew to collect. "Helen, you did an amazing thing today. Patricia told me you raised more money than they usually get in 6 months of regular donations." "But I did it for the wrong reasons, didn't I?" I kept my eyes on the dishes, afraid that if I looked at Monica, I might start crying. I wanted to prove that Sarah was wrong about me, that I wasn't just being dramatic. Instead, I proved she was exactly right. Monica leaned against the counter beside me. "What are you going to do now?" "I don't know. Cancel the newspaper article, I suppose. Make sure nobody thinks this was about getting back at Sarah for uninviting me." "It's too late for that." "But Helen, maybe that's not the most important thing right now." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe instead of worrying about how this makes you look, you should focus on how it makes Sarah feel, and how you can repair things with her before your grandchild is born." That evening, I drove to Sarah and Brandon's house in Tempe. Their car was in the driveway, and I could see lights on in their living room, but when I rang the doorbell, nobody answered. I knew they were home. I also knew they were avoiding me. I sat on their front step and wrote a letter on the back of one of the fundraiser programs I'd brought to show them how successful the event had been. Instead, I found myself writing an apology. "Sarah, I know you're inside, and I know you don't want to see me right now. I don't blame you. Today, I threw a party that proved everything you said about me was true. I made your baby shower about me, even after you canceled it. I turned our family conflict into a public display of my own generosity. I made myself look good at your expense, exactly the way you said I always do." I slipped the letter under their door and drove home. Sunday morning, Sarah called me. Her voice was softer than it had been in weeks, but I could hear the exhaustion underneath. "Mom, I got your letter." "I meant every word, sweetheart." "I know you did, and I know the fundraiser helped a lot of families. Monica told me how much money you raised. But that doesn't excuse why I did it." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Mom, can I ask you something? When you were planning my shower, what were you thinking about?" The question surprised me. I was thinking about how happy you'd be when you saw everything, how proud I'd be to show people what a wonderful daughter I have, and how excited we all are about the baby. I was thinking about creating memories that would last forever. But did you ever think about what I might actually want? Not what you thought I should want, but what I actually asked for? I considered lying, giving her the answer she wanted to hear. Instead, I told the truth. No, honey. I thought about what would make me happy to give you. I didn't really consider what would make you happy to receive. Thank you for admitting that. We talked for an hour, the longest conversation we'd had in months. Sarah explained how overwhelmed she'd felt, watching me take over all the planning, how guilty she'd felt about not being more grateful, how trapped she'd felt between hurting my feelings and advocating for what she actually wanted. I explained how lost I'd been feeling since retirement, how planning her shower had given me a sense of purpose, how terrified I was that I wouldn't be a good grandmother if I couldn't prove myself as a party planner. Mom, I don't need you to throw me elaborate parties to prove you love me. I need you to listen to me when I tell you what I actually need. What do you need, Sarah? I need you to come to the shower Monica is planning for next weekend. Just a simple gathering at her house with cake and punch and maybe 15 people. I need you to be my mom, not my event coordinator. I'd like that very much. And Mom, I need you to help me understand how to be a mother without losing myself the way you did when I was born. That stopped me cold. What do you mean? Ever since Dad died, you've poured all of your identity into being my mother. But Mom, I'm an adult now. I have my own life, my own husband, my own dreams. I need you to have your own identity too, so that when this baby comes, you can be their grandmother without trying to be their mother. It was the hardest conversation we'd ever had, but also the most honest. The next Saturday, I went to Monica's house for Sarah's real baby shower. 15 women crowded into her living room, eating sheet cake from the grocery store and playing silly games with safety pins and toilet paper. Sarah opened gifts sitting on Monica's couch in her pajamas and slippers, laughing at the ridiculous onesies her college friends had bought and crying over the handmade blanket her mother-in-law had crocheted. It was nothing like the elegant affair I'd planned. It was perfect. I gave Sarah my gift last, the photo album I'd been secretly working on for months. But instead of filling it with pictures from her past, I'd left it mostly empty, with just one photo on the first page. The ultrasound image she'd given me when she announced the pregnancy. It's for you to fill, I told her, with whatever memories you want to keep. 3 months later, when my grandson David was born, I was there at the hospital. Not to organize or orchestrate or plan anything elaborate. Just to hold my daughter's hand and meet my grandchild for the first time. The drama I'd created over the baby shower became a family story we laugh about now, mostly. The crisis center still sends me thank you cards, and I've become a regular volunteer there, helping with their genuine fundraising events. But the real worth of that $50,000 lesson wasn't the money we raised or the newspaper coverage or the proof that I could turn conflict into charity. It was learning that love isn't about creating the perfect celebration or proving how much you care through elaborate gestures. Sometimes love is just showing up quietly, listening carefully, and letting other people be the stars of their own stories. Sarah and I have a different relationship now, one built on boundaries and honesty instead of guilt and grand gestures. I still help with David, but I ask what she needs instead of assuming I know. I still send gifts and plan visits, but I check with her first instead of surprising her with my own vision of what grandmotherhood should look like. And when David is old enough for birthday parties, I'm going to let his parents plan them exactly the way they want them, even if that means pizza and paper plates instead of catered affairs with string quartets. Because I finally understand that the best gift I can give my family isn't a perfect party or a flawless celebration. It's the gift of letting them celebrate in their own way, while I stand beside them with love and support instead of standing in front of them with my own agenda. That's a lesson worth any amount of drama, and definitely worth more than $50,000. The weeks following David's birth brought changes I hadn't anticipated. Sarah had always been independent, but motherhood intensified that fierce protectiveness in ways that sometimes left me feeling like an outsider looking in. I'd arrive for my scheduled visits with carefully chosen gifts and planned activities, only to find Sarah exhausted and overwhelmed, needing help with laundry and grocery shopping instead of admiring the organic cotton onesies I'd picked out. It was during one of those early visits, when David was about 6 weeks old, that I discovered something that would change everything I thought I knew about my relationship with my daughter. Sarah had fallen asleep on the couch while nursing, and David was contentedly dozing in her arms. I was folding baby clothes in their living room when I noticed a stack of papers on the coffee table that had clearly been left out from some kind of discussion. The letterhead caught my attention first. Hartwell and Associates, Family Law. My chest tightened as I recognized it as a legal firm. Below that, in formal legal language, was a document that made my hands shake as I read it. Petition for grandparents. Rights restriction. I sat down heavily in Brandon's recliner, the tiny yellow sleeper I'd been folding forgotten in my lap. The document outlined a request to legally limit my access to David, citing, quote, pattern of boundary violations, and, quote, emotional manipulation tactics that create family instability. It was dated 2 weeks after David's birth, and both Sarah and Brandon's signatures were at the bottom. My daughter was trying to legally prevent me from seeing my grandson. The sound of Sarah stirring on the couch made me quickly fold the document back under the other papers, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure it would wake David. Sarah opened her eyes and smiled at me sleepily, the same trusting smile she'd given me as a little girl when I'd come to check on her after a nightmare. Thanks for folding those, Mom. I feel like I'm drowning in tiny clothes. I managed to smile back, but inside I was reeling. How could she be looking at me with such warmth, while simultaneously consulting lawyers about keeping me away from her son? Of course, sweetie, that's what grandmothers are for. But apparently, according to the legal document hidden under those innocent-looking papers, that wasn't what this grandmother was for at all. I finished my visit as normally as possible, cooing over David and helping Sarah organize the nursery, all while feeling like I was performing a role in a play where only I knew the tragic ending was coming. When I got home that evening, I couldn't stop thinking about those formal legal phrases. Pattern of boundary violations. Emotional manipulation tactics. Was that really how Sarah saw me? As someone so toxic that she needed court orders to protect her child from me? I spent that night going through every interaction I'd had with Sarah and Brandon since David's birth, analyzing each conversation and visit for signs of the manipulation they claimed to see. The time I'd brought over dinner without being asked, and Sarah had seemed annoyed that I'd made salmon instead of asking what she wanted. The afternoon I'd rearranged their diaper-changing station to be more efficient, and Brandon had quietly moved everything back after I left. The morning I'd arrived early to help with David's first pediatrician appointment, and found them rushing to get ready because they'd forgotten I was coming. Each memory took on a different meaning when viewed through the lens of that legal document. What I'd seen as helpful gestures, they'd interpreted as controlling behavior. What I'd meant as expressions of love and excitement about being a grandmother, they'd experienced as violations of their autonomy as parents. The next morning, I called my own lawyer. Margaret Chen had handled Robert's estate and had become something of a friend over the years. When I explained the situation, she was quiet for a long moment. Helen, grandparents' rights laws in Arizona are quite limited. Generally, grandparents can only petition for visitation if there's been a significant relationship with the grandchild and the parents are preventing contact. But what you're describing sounds more like your daughter is trying to establish boundaries, not cut off contact entirely. But Margaret, they're talking about restricting my rights. That sounds like they want to control when and how I can see David. It could also mean they want to formalize what those boundaries look like so everyone knows what to expect. Helen, have Sarah and Brandon actually said they don't want you to see David anymore? I thought about Sarah's smile that morning, the way she'd asked me to help fold laundry, how she'd handed David to me when he'd started fussing so she could use the bathroom. No, they haven't said that. Then this document might be more about creating structure than creating separation. But Helen, I have to ask, do you think their concerns about boundary violations might be valid? That was the question I'd been avoiding. Margaret had known me for years, had seen how I'd handled Robert's illness and death, how I'd struggled with retirement and finding new purpose. She'd also heard me talk about the baby shower drama and my complicated relationship with Sarah. I don't know, I admitted. I thought I was being helpful. But maybe helpful to me isn't the same as helpful to them. Margaret was quiet again. Helen, what do you want to happen here? Do you want to fight this legally? Because I'll represent you if that's what you decide. But I think you might want to consider whether there's another approach that would be better for everyone involved, especially for David. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I called Sarah and asked if we could talk honestly about our relationship, not as mother and daughter caught up in old patterns, but as two adults who both loved David and wanted what was best for him. We met at a coffee shop in Scottsdale, neutral territory where neither of us would feel defensive about our own space being invaded. Sarah looked tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from weeks of interrupted sleep and the overwhelming responsibility of caring for a tiny human. But she also looked determined, more confident than I'd seen her since David's birth. "Mom, I'm glad you called. We need to have this conversation. Sarah, I saw the legal papers on your coffee table yesterday. I wasn't snooping, they were just there, and I couldn't help noticing what they were." Sarah's face flushed red, but she didn't deny it. "I was wondering if you'd seen those. Brandon and I have been trying to figure out how to approach this situation without hurting your feelings, but we're not sure that's possible." "What situation exactly?" "I thought things were going well. You seemed happy to see me yesterday. David and I are bonding. I've been helping with whatever you need." "And that's part of the problem, Mom. You've been helping with what you think we need, not what we actually need. And when we try to redirect you, or establish boundaries, you get hurt or defensive, and then we end up feeling guilty for trying to protect our own family dynamic." I stirred my coffee, buying time to process what she was saying. "Can you give me an example?" "Last week, when you reorganized our kitchen while I was napping with David. You meant well, but now I can't find anything, and when Brandon tried to make dinner, he had to call me out of bed to ask where you'd moved the spices. It took us an hour to figure out your new system." I remembered that afternoon. Sarah had seemed so overwhelmed by the dishes piling up and the general chaos of new parenthood. Organizing her kitchen had felt like a concrete way to help, something that would save her time and energy in the long run. "I was trying to make things more efficient for you. But I didn't ask you to reorganize my kitchen, Mom. I asked you to hold David so I could take a shower. Instead, you took on a project that created more work for us, not less." She was right, and the realization stung. I'd seen a problem that needed solving and had jumped into fix-it mode without considering whether my solution would actually be helpful to the people living with the consequences. "What about the legal documents, Sarah? Are you really trying to restrict my access to David?" Sarah looked down at her hands, and I could see the conflict playing out on her face. "Mom, we consulted the lawyer because we didn't know how else to establish boundaries that you would respect. Every time we try to tell you what we need, you seem to hear it as criticism or rejection, and then you either get hurt or you double down on trying to prove how helpful you are." "But Sarah, I love you and David so much. I just want to be a good grandmother." "I know that, and I know your intentions are good. But Mom, good intentions don't automatically make your actions helpful. And being a good grandmother doesn't mean being involved in every aspect of David's care, or making decisions about how we run our household." The coffee shop hummed with conversation around us, people having normal discussions about work and weather and weekend plans. Meanwhile, my daughter was explaining to me why she'd felt the need to involve lawyers in our family relationship. "What would you need from me, Sarah? To feel like you could trust me to respect your boundaries without legal intervention?" Sarah looked surprised by the question. "Honestly, Mom, I need you to ask before you help. I need you to accept no as an answer without making me feel guilty about it. And I need you to understand that Brandon and I are David's parents, which means we get to make the decisions about how he's raised, even if you disagree with those decisions. Even if I think you're making mistakes? Especially then. Mom, you raised me and I turned out okay, right? You made mistakes too, and I survived them. David's going to be fine, even if Brandon and I don't do everything exactly the way you would." That hit me harder than I'd expected. Robert and I had made plenty of parenting mistakes with Sarah. We'd been overprotective about some things and too lenient about others. We'd argued about discipline and homework and curfews, and somehow Sarah had grown up to become a thoughtful, responsible adult, despite our imperfections. But somewhere along the way, I'd started believing that my experience as Sarah's mother made me an expert on all things child-related, that my age and experience gave me the right to weigh in on Brandon and Sarah's parenting choices. I'd forgotten that they were the parents now, not me. Sarah, I need to tell you something. The baby shower drama, the fundraiser, all of that. I've been thinking about it a lot since David was born, and I realize that I used your pregnancy and his birth as an opportunity to make myself feel important and needed. I was so afraid of being left out of this incredible experience that I inserted myself into every aspect of it, even when you tried to tell me you needed space. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Mom, I never wanted to leave you out. I just wanted to feel like I had some control over my own experience of becoming a mother. And instead of supporting that, I made it about my experience of becoming a grandmother. We sat there for a moment, both of us crying quietly in the middle of a busy coffee shop. It wasn't the elegant, resolved conversation I'd hoped for, but it felt real in a way our interactions hadn't in years. Sarah, what if we tried something different? What if instead of consulting lawyers about boundaries, we worked together to figure out what a healthy grandmother relationship looks like for our family? What did you have in mind? I don't know exactly, but maybe we could start with me asking what you need instead of assuming I know. Maybe we could have regular check-ins about how things are going, where you can tell me honestly if I'm overstepping without worrying about hurting my feelings. Sarah wiped her eyes with her napkin. Would you really be okay with me telling you when you're being too much? Because, Mom, sometimes you are too much, and I need to be able to say that without you getting defensive or hurt. I'll try. I can't promise I won't feel hurt sometimes, but I can promise to try to hear what you're telling me instead of just reacting to it. And what if I ask you to back off from something that's important to you? Like, what if I don't want you to throw David elaborate birthday parties? Or what if Brandon and I decide we want to handle bedtime routines ourselves? The old me would have felt crushed by those examples, would have heard them as rejection of my love and enthusiasm. But sitting there looking at my exhausted daughter, I tried to hear them as information about what she needed to feel confident as a mother. Then I'll back off. And maybe you can help me understand why those boundaries are important to you, so I can support your parenting choices instead of undermining them. Sarah smiled for the first time since we'd sat down. I'd like that. Clean up in their own way and their own time. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and David was asleep, Sarah found me in the kitchen washing dishes that I'd asked permission to wash. Mom, thank you. For what, sweetheart? For letting today be about David instead of about proving what a great grandmother you are. For letting me and Brandon be his parents without trying to be his parents too. I dried my hands on the dish towel, one of the simple cotton ones Sarah had chosen for her kitchen, instead of the fancy monogrammed ones I might have given her. Thank you for teaching me how to do that. I know it wasn't easy. It was worth it though. This is the relationship I always wanted us to have, Mom. One where we're both comfortable being ourselves. Looking back now, I realize that the $50,000 I'd spent trying to prove my worth as a grandmother had taught me the wrong lesson entirely. I'd thought the problem was that I wasn't generous enough, wasn't creative enough, wasn't elaborate enough in my expressions of love. The real lesson was much simpler and much harder. Love isn't about what you can do for someone, or how impressively you can demonstrate your feelings. Love is about seeing people clearly, accepting what they tell you about their needs, and supporting their choices even when those choices wouldn't be your choices. The legal document Sarah had consulted about restricting my access to David never became necessary, because I learned to restrict myself, to set my own boundaries around my need to be needed, to find ways to be helpful that were actually helpful, rather than just satisfying to me. David is 3 years old now, and I see him regularly, but not constantly. I babysit occasionally, but not as his primary caregiver. I offer advice when asked, but I don't volunteer it when it isn't wanted. Sarah calls me when she's having hard days as a mother, not because she needs me to fix anything, but because she knows I'll listen without judgment and support her decisions even when they're difficult. It's a quieter kind of grandmother relationship than I'd originally imagined, but it's also more authentic. David knows me as someone who shows up consistently but not overwhelmingly, someone who loves him completely but doesn't try to control his world, someone who supports his parents instead of competing with them. The woman who threw a charity fundraiser to prove a point about her own generosity feels like a stranger to me now. She wasn't wrong to want to help families in crisis. But she was wrong to use that help as a weapon in a family conflict. Wrong to turn her daughter's boundaries into a public performance of her own virtue. The real drama worth $50,000 wasn't the elaborate fundraiser or the newspaper coverage, or the proof that I could turn conflict into charity. It was the slow, unglamorous work of learning to love my daughter and grandson in the ways they needed to be loved, rather than in the ways that made me feel important. That's a lesson that's worth any amount of money, and it's one that continues to pay dividends in the form of genuine relationships built on trust and respect, rather than guilt and grand gestures. 2 years after David's 3rd birthday, I thought our family had settled into a peaceful rhythm. Sarah and Brandon had bought a bigger house in Gilbert, I'd found my place as a grandmother who asked before helping, and David had started calling me Nana in his sweet toddler voice that made my heart melt every time. I was proud of the progress we'd all made, proud of the boundaries we'd established, proud of how I'd learned to love them in healthier ways. Then Sarah called me on a Thursday evening in October with news that would test everything we'd built together. "Mom, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out completely before you react." I was in my kitchen making dinner, a simple pasta dish that had become my routine since learning to cook for one again. Something in Sarah's tone made me turn off the burner and give her my full attention. "I'm listening, sweetheart." "We're moving to Denver." Brandon got, "Mom, I really would." The next few months were an exercise in unlearning patterns I'd developed over 32 years of being Sarah's mother. When I visited, I asked what would be most helpful instead of surveying their house for tasks I could tackle. When Sarah made parenting decisions I questioned, I bit my tongue and asked myself whether my input was necessary or just wanted. When David fussed and I had ideas about what might help, I offered suggestions instead of taking over. It was harder than I'd expected. There were moments when I watched Sarah struggling with David's sleep schedule and wanted desperately to share all the techniques that had worked when she was a baby. There were afternoons when I arrived to find their house in chaos and had to resist the urge to start cleaning and organizing. There were decisions they made about David's care that I genuinely thought were mistakes, and learning to trust their judgment over my experience felt like swallowing my words over and over again. But there were also unexpected rewards. When Sarah asked for my advice instead of receiving it as unwanted criticism, she actually listened to what I had to say. When I stepped back from trying to manage every aspect of their household, I had more energy to focus on building a real relationship with David. When I stopped trying to prove how helpful I was, I started noticing what kind of help they actually appreciated. The legal document disappeared from their coffee table, and neither of us mentioned it again, but the conversations it had prompted continued. Sarah started telling me directly when she needed space, or when my suggestions weren't welcome, and I started being able to hear those boundaries as information rather than rejection. The real test came when David was 4 months old and Sarah went back to work. She'd been dreading the transition, worried about leaving David with a babysitter, and anxious about pumping breast milk, and managing her teaching schedule with a baby at home. The old me would have immediately volunteered to provide childcare, would have assumed that grandmother care was obviously preferable to hiring someone outside the family. I would have planned out David's daily schedule and prepared detailed instructions for Sarah about how to make the transition easier. Instead, I asked Sarah what kind of support would be most helpful during this transition, and I listened to her answer. She and Brandon had already chosen a daycare provider they trusted. What Sarah needed from me wasn't childcare, but emotional support. She needed someone to listen when she felt guilty about leaving David, someone to reassure her that working mothers could still be good mothers, someone to celebrate David's milestones without making her feel guilty for missing them during work hours. I became that person for Sarah in ways I'd never been before. Instead of trying to solve her problems, I learned to simply witness them. Instead of offering advice about how she should feel, I validated the feelings she was having. Instead of trying to make her transition back to work easier by taking over responsibilities, I supported the choices she and Brandon made about how to handle their new routine. 6 months later, when we gathered for David's 1st birthday, I watched Sarah and Brandon plan a simple celebration in their backyard, with cake and balloons and a handful of close friends. The old me would have wanted to transform their modest party into an elaborate affair with themed decorations and professional photography, and enough food for twice as many people. Instead, I brought the gift they'd asked for, a sturdy wagon for pulling David around the neighborhood, and I spent the afternoon following their lead about how to celebrate their son's 1st year of life. When David smashed his first piece of birthday cake all over his high chair, I didn't rush to clean him up or take pictures or make suggestions about how to handle the mess. I just sat there laughing with everyone else, watching my grandson discover the joy of smearing frosting in his hair, trusting that his parents would handle the AO. Offered a position at a charter school there. And it's exactly the kind of opportunity he's been working toward for years. Better salary, smaller classes, administrative support. We can't turn it down. The wooden spoon slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. Denver, 800 miles away, a 12-hour drive from Phoenix. David, my sweet grandson, who was just starting to have real conversations with me, would be living in a different state. When, was all I could manage to say. We need to be there by January. Brandon starts the new semester, and we want David settled before he turns 4. 3 months. They were giving me 3 months to prepare for the end of the relationship I'd worked so hard to build with my grandson. Sarah, I know this is a great opportunity for Brandon, but have you thought about what this means for David? He's never lived anywhere but Arizona. His whole world is here. Actually, Mom, that's part of why this feels like good timing. He's young enough to adapt easily, and he'll be starting preschool in a new place anyway. Kids are resilient at this age. I wanted to argue that David's resilience wasn't the only thing that mattered. That leaving behind his grandmother, who loved him, wasn't just a minor adjustment. But I caught myself. This was exactly the kind of reaction Sarah was asking me not to have. The kind of making it about me response that had caused so much tension between us before. What can I do to support this transition? I asked instead, and I could hear the surprise in Sarah's pause. Honestly, Mom, I was expecting you to be more upset about this. I am upset. I'm heartbroken about the idea of David living so far away. But this isn't about what I want, is it? This is about what's best for your family. It really is, Mom. This job could change everything for us. Better benefits, opportunity for advancement, and the cost of living in Denver means we might actually be able to buy a house with a real yard for David. Over the next few weeks, I watched Sarah and Brandon prepare for their move, with a mixture of pride and grief that surprised me with its intensity. I was genuinely happy for them, excited about Brandon's career opportunity and Sarah's chance to start fresh in a new city. But I was also mourning the loss of regular Sunday dinners, spontaneous playground visits, and bedtime story reading sessions with David. The old me would have tried to talk them out of leaving, would have found reasons why Denver wasn't really a good choice, would have offered financial incentives to stay in Arizona. Instead, I focused on helping them prepare for the move in ways they actually wanted help. When Sarah mentioned being overwhelmed by the logistics of moving with a toddler, I offered to research pediatricians and daycare centers in Denver. When Brandon worried about the physical demands of packing while working full-time, I volunteered to organize their belongings and coordinate with the moving company. When they stressed about David's reaction to leaving his familiar environment, I helped create photo books of his favorite Arizona places to take with him. But privately, I was struggling more than I let on. The idea of seeing David only a few times a year instead of every week felt like losing him all over again. I'd worked so hard to build a healthy relationship with my grandson, and now geography was going to limit that relationship in ways that had nothing to do with boundaries or respect or family dynamics. Margaret Chen noticed my distress when we met for our monthly lunch at our favorite cafe in Old Town Scottsdale. "Helen, you've been stirring that soup for 5 minutes without taking a bite. What's going on?" I told her about the move, about my mixed feelings of support and loss, about my fear that David would forget me once he was living so far away. "Have you talked to Sarah about visiting arrangements? About how you'll maintain your relationship with David long distance?" I don't want to pressure them, Margaret. They've got so much to figure out right now. And I don't want to add guilt about managing my feelings on top of everything else they're dealing with. Margaret set down her sandwich and looked at me directly. "Helen, there's a difference between pressuring them and advocating for your relationship with David. You've worked hard to become a grandmother who respects boundaries, but that doesn't mean you have to pretend you don't have needs too." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe it's time to have an honest conversation with Sarah about how you can all maintain your family connections across the distance. Not demanding specific arrangements, but collaborating on solutions that work for everyone." That evening, I called Sarah and asked if we could talk about the practical aspects of staying connected after the move. "Mom, I've been wondering when you were going to bring this up. I know this is hard for you, and I've been trying to figure out how to address it. Sarah, I want to be clear that I support your decision to move, and I'm not trying to make you feel guilty about it. But I also want to be honest that I'm scared about losing my relationship with David. You're not going to lose your relationship with him, Mom. We're moving to Denver, not disappearing off the planet. But realistically, how often will I see him? A few times a year? Will that be enough to maintain a real connection? Sarah was quiet for a moment, and I could almost hear her thinking through the logistics. Mom, what if we committed to regular visits? Like, what if you came to Denver every other month, and we came to Arizona every other month in between? That way David would see you 6 times a year, but for longer stretches each time. That sounds wonderful, but Sarah, I don't want to impose that kind of hosting responsibility on you. Having house guests every other month is a lot, especially when you're settling into a new city. What if some of those visits were just you and David? Like, what if sometimes you came to Denver and took David on adventures while Brandon and I had some alone time? Or what if sometimes David came to Arizona by himself to spend a long weekend with you? The idea of David visiting me alone in Arizona felt both thrilling and terrifying. By the time he was old enough for solo visits, he'd be 5 or 6, old enough to handle a plane trip but young enough to need constant supervision. Could I manage that kind of responsibility? Sarah, would you really be comfortable with David traveling alone to visit me? Mom, you've proven over the past few years that you can put David's needs first. I trust you to take care of him. And I think solo visits with you would actually be special for him. He'd have your complete attention, and you'd get to show him Arizona through your eyes. We spent the next hour planning a visiting schedule that would work for everyone. Sarah and Brandon would come to Phoenix for Thanksgiving, giving David one last Arizona holiday before the move. I would visit Denver in February to help them settle in and see David's new environment. They'd come back to Arizona for Easter, and then I'd return to Denver in early summer for David's 4th birthday. But the conversation that really surprised me came when Sarah brought up something I hadn't expected. Mom, there's something else I want to talk to you about. This move is going to be expensive, and I know the visiting schedule we're planning is going to cost you a lot of money too. Plane tickets, hotels, rental cars. I don't want your relationship with David to be limited by financial concerns. Sarah, that's not your responsibility to worry about. But it is, Mom. If we want David to have a close relationship with his grandmother, we need to make sure that's financially sustainable for you. What if we split the travel costs? What if sometimes we pay for your tickets to Denver, and sometimes you pay for our tickets to Phoenix? I was touched by her offer, but also concerned about the implications. Sweetheart, I appreciate that, but I don't want you spending money you need for your own family expenses just to manage my feelings about the distance. It's not about managing your feelings, Mom. It's about recognizing that David benefits from having you in his life, and that maintaining that relationship is a family priority, not just your personal want. The distinction hit me powerfully. Sarah wasn't offering to subsidize my grandmother needs out of guilt or obligation. She was recognizing that my relationship with David had value for him, and that preserving that relationship was worth financial investment from the whole family. Are you sure about this, Sarah? I don't want to create financial pressure for you. Mom, you've spent the last 3 years learning to support our family in ways that actually help us, instead of ways that just make you feel needed. This is us supporting your relationship with David in a way that actually works, instead of just making us feel generous. The weeks leading up to their departure were bittersweet. I helped Sarah pack David's toys and books, and we created special boxes of Arizona memories for him to unpack in his new Colorado bedroom. I took hundreds of pictures of David at his favorite Phoenix parks and restaurants, wanting to document this chapter of his life before it ended. David himself seemed remarkably adaptable to the idea of moving, the way children often are when adults present change as an adventure rather than a loss. He was excited about the airplane ride, curious about snow, and thrilled by the idea of a new bedroom. His resilience reminded me that my grief about his leaving was mine to manage, not his to carry. The goodbye at the airport was harder than I'd expected. David clung to me for a long time, not because he was scared of leaving, but because he could sense my sadness. When he finally pulled back to look at my face, he patted my cheek with his small hand. Don't be sad, Nana. I'll see you in Colorado. I know you will, sweetheart. I'll miss you, but I'm excited to see your new house. After they disappeared through security, I sat in the airport parking lot and cried for 20 minutes. Not the desperate, angry tears I might have cried 3 years ago, but the clean grief of someone learning to love people enough to let them go where they need to go. My first visit to Denver in February was a revelation. Sarah and Brandon had found a charming house in a family-friendly neighborhood with mature trees and sidewalks, perfect for David's new bicycle. David had adapted beautifully to his new environment, chattering about his preschool friends and showing me the snow fort he'd built in their backyard. But what struck me most was how different my role felt in their new city. In Phoenix, I'd always been navigating the history of our complicated relationship, always aware of the boundaries we'd established and the mistakes I'd made. In Denver, I was simply David's grandmother who'd come to visit, and our interactions felt lighter, more natural. David wanted to show me everything about his new world. We visited the Denver Zoo, rode the light rail downtown, and explored the Children's Museum. Sarah and Brandon seemed genuinely relaxed about having me there, not worried about me taking over or overstepping, confident that I understood my role as visitor rather than co-parent. "Mom, you seem different here," Sarah observed one evening after David had gone to bed. "Different how?" "More relaxed, less like you're trying to prove something, and more like you're just enjoying being with us." She was right. Something about being in their space rather than mine, about being invited in rather than assuming entry, had shifted my entire approach to being with them. I was there as David's grandmother, period. Not as someone trying to demonstrate my value or establish my importance. Just as someone who loved him and wanted to spend time with him. When it was time for me to leave, David handled the goodbye much better than I did. He hugged me and said, "See you at Easter, Nana," with the confidence of a child who trusted that the adults in his life would keep their promises. The rhythm of long-distance grandparenting turned out to be different than I'd expected, but not worse. The visits were more intentional, more focused. Instead of casual drop-ins and routine interactions, every time I saw David was special, planned, full of activities we'd chosen. I get every moment of missing them and every hour spent learning to love them better. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. Specifically to enjoy together. When David came to visit me alone for the first time, when he was 5 years old, it was magical in ways that surprised both of us. Without his parents there to manage his schedule or mediate our interactions, David and I developed our own relationship rhythm. We went to the desert botanical garden and looked for lizards. We made pancakes for breakfast and let him eat them with his fingers. We read books for hours because there was no one else competing for our attention. By the end of that visit, David and I had inside jokes and special traditions that belonged just to us. When Sarah picked him up at the airport in Denver, he chattered nonstop about our adventures, and I could see in her face that she was happy about how close David and I had become, not threatened by it. The financial arrangement Sarah had proposed worked better than either of us had expected. Sometimes I paid for visits, sometimes they did, but more importantly, we planned them together as family investments rather than as obligations or gifts. The costs evened out over time, and the shared responsibility meant that everyone was invested in making the visits happen regularly. Now, 2 years into their Denver life, David is 6 years old and has lived in Colorado longer than he lived in Arizona. He doesn't remember much about his early Phoenix years, but he knows I'm his Arizona Nana who comes to visit with special plans and undivided attention. The relationship we have now is different from what I'd imagined when he was born, but it's authentic in ways that wouldn't have been possible if I'd succeeded in keeping them in Phoenix through guilt or manipulation. David knows me as someone who shows up consistently across distance and time, someone who loves him enough to get on airplanes and travel to his world, someone his parents trust and welcome. Sarah and I have learned to maintain our own relationship across the miles, too. We talk on the phone weekly, and our conversations have a depth that didn't exist when we were managing the constant friction of my over-involvement in their daily lives. Distance has given us perspective on what's truly important in our relationship, and what was just habit or anxiety masquerading as love. The $50,000 I originally spent trying to prove my worth as a grandmother taught me that love can't be bought or demonstrated through elaborate gestures. But the money I now spend maintaining relationships across 800 miles has taught me that love sometimes requires practical investment, that caring about people means being willing to pay the costs of staying connected even when it's inconvenient or expensive. The difference is intention. The first money was spent trying to get something, trying to prove something, trying to control something. This money is spent simply maintaining something beautiful that already exists. Sometimes I think about the woman who threw that charity fundraiser to make a point about her own generosity, and she feels like someone from a different lifetime. She wasn't wrong to want close relationships with her family, but she was wrong about how to build and maintain them. Real love, I've learned, isn't about being indispensable or irreplaceable. It's about being consistent and trustworthy, about showing up when you say you will, about respecting the choices people make, even when those choices take them further away from you. David is learning that families can love each other across distance, that relationships can be maintained through intention and effort, that someone can be important to you even if they don't live in your everyday world. Those are lessons that will serve him well throughout his life, and I'm proud to be the grandmother who helped teach them to him. The drama I created over a baby shower seems insignificant now compared to the quiet daily work of loving people well. But in its way, that original conflict taught me everything I needed to know about building relationships based on what other people need, rather than what I want to give them. And that lesson has been worth every dollar, every plane,